Welcome to the Lara Jane Layton Show. This podcast is for you, the person who keeps putting others first. Your self-talk has held you back. You no longer need to take a second seat. Let's explore ways to overcome self-doubt. You can silence that inner bully voice and achieve your full potential. Here's your host, Lara Jane.
Hello, listener. It is your host, Lara Jane, and I'm so excited to be here with another best friend, and her name is Janette. And Janette and I are going to talk today about self-improvement and how we have to have a huge dose of self-compassion to make our lives change and to become better. Janette's bio, how to get a hold of her, and everything about her are in our show notes. But let's jump right into this and let's talk about self-improvement with compassion.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you, Lara Jane. I'm just loving this. And self-compassion, oh my gosh, it's such a huge part of helping us to heal and grow and expand and express ourselves more authentically in the world. And that's because I'm sure, listener, if you are, if you've been in the world of self-improvement for more than about 5 minutes, you probably come across the work of Brené Brown and people who talk with such authority about how destructive shame is. And one of the things that can happen so easily, and I know this because it's happened for me so often, but one of the things that can happen so easily is we get on this, we get excited about the idea of self-improvement. We think, I'd love to be more authentic. I want to be more myself in the world. I want to grow. I want to expand. And then at some point, in comes a nasty little toxic voice of shame that says, you're not doing it well enough. You should be further ahead by now. You should be more yourself. Look at so-and-so over there. Look at the journey they've undertaken. They've changed their lives. What's wrong with you that you haven't finished changing your life yet? You're so far behind. And that stuff, it's like meta stuff that is sitting there in judgment. So while we're working on self-improvement and letting go of judgment and being kind to ourselves, we can get this meta layer of judgment about I'm not doing non-judgment well enough yet. I still have shame. What's wrong with me? And so we end up feeling shame for having feelings of shame. So we get caught up in this toxic swirl of shame and pressure and punishment. And it doesn't happen all the time. It doesn't happen to every single person all the time, but it can come up, and it can come up in unexpected moments and unexpected ways. And the only solution to it, is compassion. It's the only thing that will cut through that shame. Not just acceptance, but actual proactive compassion. Here's a creature in pain. What would I do if I saw a creature in pain? I would feel compassion for it. And that's all I would feel.
They're so true. If our friend was to go through what we were going through, we wouldn't tell them they were stupid or just get up. What are you doing that for? We'd be supportive. And why can we not do that to pour ourselves? And it is okay to criticize, but we just then need to love ourselves and add back the compassion, because crap happens. Mm-hmm. And it's okay. That's the hardest part to learn. Is it's okay. Oh my gosh, I was just a real bitch to that person. Guess what? Yeah. It's okay. But yeah. I am going to love myself and be okay with it. And next time I will be nicer.
The interesting thing that I have come to realize through working with clients for many years now is that there's a sort of missing piece in the conversation when it comes to self-improvement, I think. And that is, so we know, for example, that a lot of the time our feelings of shame and all those things that sort of stand in our way. Our barriers can come from individual trauma, the stuff that we've experienced in childhood, the stuff that we've experienced during our lives. We know the role that trauma plays. We also know that things like our fight-flight response, this is a survival mechanism that we acquired, as does every creature with a brain. So it's not just humans. We all have it. If we have a brain, we have a fight-flight response. It's designed to keep us alive. And we got that from 200,000 years of cave ancestors. There's a piece in between those, and that's the role of cultural and long-standing systemic paradigms. And this is what the piece that I don't think a lot of people are talking about in this work, because we're very focused on the kind of our relationship as with ourselves and our lives as individuals. And yes, we do have that personal responsibility, but I think it's unhelpful to imagine that it's all on our shoulders, that we are the sole source of these feelings of shame or whatever. So one of the things I talk about with my clients, one of the things I teach is around, or a good example of this is imposter syndrome. So here's this phenomenon that was identified in the second half of the 20th century with women working in high-powered positions. They felt like they didn't belong. They felt nervous all the time in case somebody catches them out, being in the wrong place. I'm using air quotes for wrong place. That sense of, they made a mistake hiring me, even though on paper their numbers were good, their results were outstanding, they were doing a really good job, and yet internally they felt this feeling of insecurity and I'm an imposter. And it was titled, when that phenomenon was first noticed as a phenomenon happening to many, many people, it was given a label, imposter syndrome, as though it were an issue, a problem for the individual. What we now realize after years of more research and recognizing that imposter syndrome happens to lots and lots of people, not just women, it happens to men, happens to people in different circumstances. What we realize now is that if you grow up in a culture where you witness that certain people from certain communities, particularly historically marginalized communities, if those people go into places where they don't belong, air quotes, don't belong, then the consequences can be extremely dangerous. They can even be lethal. So it's not surprising that our very smart brains, which are designed to keep us safe, have taken on board the message, the internal message that says, if you get caught in the wrong place, the consequences could be lethal. You'd better get out of here. So when we think about imposter syndrome, it's actually a very natural, reasonable, rational response to a culture which says women don't really belong in the halls of power. And if you get caught here, you'll get in so much trouble. So to characterize it as to call it imposter syndrome, which implies it's a you problem,
right,
is really misleading, because actually it's a culture problem. It's a problem that says you'll get in trouble if you're caught here, that has been wired into you for years and years and years and years and years. I mean, there are many of us still on the planet who are old enough to remember what it was like before women were allowed to have credit cards in their own name.
Or vote. No, there's so many things they couldn't.
My grandmother was born before women could vote. So it's not that far back.
I know.
So when you think about it from that perspective, when we feel those feelings of, I'm not doing it well, I'm not doing self-improvement well enough, I should be doing it better, we also need to recognize that it may not just be a you problem. It's not your fault. It's not a character flaw. It is a consequence of the culture within which we grow up, whether it's because you're a woman or because you're Black or because of ability, physical ability, or all of these different systems that tell us certain people don't belong in certain places. Suddenly you go, oh, it's not me. It was never me.
And you're talking to this, and I'm just like, and who said we had to be like that anyway? Some of this imposter syndrome is because we feel like we're trying to meet a mold. and
Oh, yes.
be like somebody, or it's like, I'm this round peg and there's this square hole. I fit in it just fine. There's no problem. It goes through, but somebody told me I needed to be square to go through that hole.
Right.
It's not true. It's you fit just fine. And it's this expectation or this societal passed down generation by generation that isn't true anymore. It's kind of like that old adage where the mother's cutting the ends off the ham to put it in the oven. I'm sure everybody's heard this. And Mom, why do you do that? Because it makes it taste better. So, or I don't know, ask your grandma. And you get to the original source. Oh, well, it didn't fit in the oven without it. So we don't know why we think some of these things are expectations, but we hold them on ourselves. And to be truly authentic, we have to let go of that expectation and start being true to how we feel we are.
Yes.
And it's not it's easy said and not so easy to do, because it's society. There are expectations. There are people who want the roles to stay consistent and not a surprise, because it helps them be more comfortable in this world.
Of course. And that's the nature of change. I think where it gets really juicy and interesting is when we think about how we might have these internalized unconscious rules about things like you don't belong in certain places, for example. And even though the sort of irritating thing, and I do, just as a sidebar, I do sometimes walk my clients through a process of being able to vent their rage about this when they suddenly realize, I've been trying to fix the me problem for 10 years, and now I find out it was never a me problem in the first place. How dare they impose this on me? It's quite a reasonable feeling to kind of go, I'm really enraged. And once we can sort of move through that, because that resentment and rage is quite reasonable given the circumstances, once we can move through that and recognize, oh, okay, this stuff that's been living in my head all along, the bullying voices in my head, that was never my fault. It was never anything wrong with me. That makes me angry. And once I accept that, I can then move to the next phase, which is basically saying, it wasn't my fault that this stuff got installed in me, but it is my responsibility to rewire it.
Yes.
And this is where I'm a huge fan of neuroplasticity, the fact that we now know, which we didn't, 20, 30 years ago. Yeah. Well, at least most of us didn't. A few neuroscientists knew about this, but nobody else knew that the adult brain is just as flexible and changeable as is the child's brain. So we can rewire some of this stuff. We just can't do it through willpower and intellectually muscling our way through it. This is why techniques such as affirmations actually work. They give our brain a completely new framework within which to perceive, our brain's opinion of ourselves can change. And it happens through repetition and what I call juice, engagement, emotional or sensory engagement. So it is possible to change this wiring. We just can't do it through punishing ourselves and shaming ourselves into it, because it was never it's not a character flaw. We're not trying to fix a character flaw. We're just trying to reprogram something that got installed into us. And you're quite right. Part of the reason it got installed in us is because it originated with, and in some places is sustained by, people who have a vested interest in us not being out there being authentic, not being out there looking after our own needs instead of their needs, not being, not standing our ground. So there's always going to be, not necessarily in your immediate circle. I mean, you might be surrounded by loved ones who absolutely want you to thrive, absolutely want you to take care of your own needs. But there's that programming that gets installed in all of us tells us that out there in the wider world, someone is going to disapprove of us, and that can put us at risk, and that makes it scary. And that's when our brain says, no, we won't go there until we do this work of rewiring it.
Right. You know, there's that quote, and forgetting her name again, but if you're fitting, you know, when you are trying to fit in, you're not being your authentic self.
Mm-hmm.
When you belong, you're being authentic. And if you think about it, I could be with the exact same group of friends and we could have all the same interests. But if I'm focused on fitting in to be in that square peg instead of the round peg that fits just fine, if I'm focusing on the things I, in my brain, think are different, then I am stressing my own authenticity, where all I have to do is quit. I don't know if that sounds really easy, but quit worrying about fitting in and be yourself. And the people who want to be with you are going to stay with you. They're not going to leave because they now have the, what's the word I want to use? Not blessing. They now believe they too can be authentic. Once somebody can allow themselves to not be perfect in someone else's eyes, you all of a sudden become perfect in your own.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the whole concept of perfectionism, all of the things we experience around our addiction to overwork and productivity, all of that stuff has been installed in us by systems that find us useful as, you know, human labor commodities. I'm starting to sound like I'm getting into my political stuff here, but it's all kind of wedded together, you know, that sense of the myth of rugged individualism, which says you're completely and solely responsible for your own life, which means you have to haul yourself up by your bootstraps, and doesn't recognize that actually you, the individual, might have had systemic disadvantages or trauma or whatever else it is that's gone on for you. Yes, we are responsible for our own healing and growth. Much as I would love to, I can't wave a magic wand and reach into everybody's brain and rewire it for them. I just don't have that power. I'm not that special.
I wish somebody else could do it for me.
I know, right? Wouldn't that be fun?
You wake up perfect.
I know. But see, that's the thing. Perfect is such a myth. Nobody's perfect. And yet there is this drive in us.
Is exactly perfect.
Exactly right. Perfect is one of those words. It's a bit like the word happiness. It's got so many different versions and meanings and so on. I am perfectly imperfect. And I love that about myself. And it took me a decade and a half of work to get to the point of being able to say that without any kind of blushing or hesitation or whatever. And that work was completely worth it to be able to get to that point. So for everybody who's listening to this, for every listener, there is this wonderful possibility that the thing you've been striving towards, as you're listening to this, the thing you've been striving towards, the solution to it very often is to recognize this thing that I've been struggling with is not a character flaw and it's not a me problem. It's been installed into me. And now I get the joy of evolving and changing without carrying the blame or the shame for it. Because if you know to your bones that it was never a you problem in the first place, it makes it so much harder to feel shame about it because it wasn't your fault. And also that in turn makes it way easier to feel compassion. So it's a bit like if you imagine your best friend has been bullied by some horrible child. I was about to use a cuss word and I won't. But they've been bullied by some horrible child in the playground and they're distressed and they're hurting and they're feeling bad. Not only do you feel protective towards them, not only can you feel compassion towards them, but you can also feel a kind of fierce I think it's Kristen Neff who's written a book fairly recently called Fierce Self-Compassion. And I really love this idea that it's not that compassion doesn't have to be this soft, fluffy thing, that actually sometimes it comes with a sword of truth and a shield of justice that says, no, I do not accept this nonsense that my brain keeps repeating. I'm not rejecting my own brain for thinking it, but I am rejecting the source of it. I don't need to know what that source is. I don't need to know which system it was that implanted that in me. That's irrelevant. They don't matter anymore. All I care about is my brain got this wired into it. It's now my responsibility to shift it. And the most effective thing I can do is to feel compassion for myself first, because that shift is so much easier when it's surrounded by this loving, protective, beautiful energy of that fierce self-compassion.
Yeah.
I get so excited about this.
You know, I do too. In this conversation, I don't even want to interrupt it. It's just so nice and flowy, but we need to stop for a moment and have a word from our sponsor. And when we come back, I want to continue this. And I have a couple ideas and directions we might be able to go for the rest. So we'll be right back.
This podcast is sponsored by Lara Jane Coaching. You know you're ready to silence your inner bully voice. Let Lara Jane support you with coaching. To schedule an introduction call, go to larajanelayton.com.
All right, listener, we are back. And this has just been such an amazing conversation because you are perfect just the way you are. And it's when we start learning that self-acceptance, which is the compassion message that Janet's been talking to us about. But I started thinking about the art of allowing. And I think because sometimes we judge, and I'm guilty, other people. We know other people judge us. And so it's that regrounding piece of, okay, that person's not doing something that I like. And start looking at it as that person is on a different path and mission than I am. The kindergartner cannot be compared to the college professor. The church leader cannot be compared to the business leader. We have different paths, and we start judging people. We are diminishing their path. And so I think as we start to learn to allow ourselves to be on our journey and learn to allow others to be on their journey, it gets a little bit easier to have that compassion for when we know we're not living authentically, because you now know I'm learning. As long as I'm a better me today than I was yesterday, and better is relevant because it's not society's definition of better. Exactly. It's how I feel. How do you feel? Are you more in line? Do you feel more? And when I say joy, I don't mean that bubbly little bouncing all over the place ball. I mean that content, that peace, that self-kindness that comes from that. And so I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about that art of allowing of, when we're compassionate with ourselves and others.
Oh my gosh, I love this so much. So one of the things, as we're recording, Australia is going through, we have a lead up to a referendum to change something in our constitution. And it's a very controversial and heated kind of conversation that's happening around ways to, the change is, I'm a huge supporter of the change. Just I'll let you know up front. And it's around giving a voice to First Nations Australians in the way that lots of other Commonwealth countries already have. And what's been fascinating is to see that there are some people who are very threatened by this, who are feeling very anxious about this. And the pathway to compassion for someone who's I'm very eager for this change to happen. So, of course, when I see somebody using a racist argument to say this shouldn't happen, everything in me fires up and I go straight to judgment, and it's really hard not to. And then the way that I pull myself back from the edge is to remind myself they are also victims of the systems. So when I talk about systemic and societal things, the more I remind myself that we are all in one way or another victims of those systems. And I learned this from a diversity coach when I was learning anti-racism stuff, that white people are victims of racism, but not in the same way that Black people are. So, for example, if you use the metaphor of a race where, there's a wonderful cartoon that sort of illustrates this, where the white person has a nice, easy track and there's nothing in the way and they can get to the end, whereas the Black person has all these different obstacles in the way. It's a very nice visual metaphor. And you think, the first thing you think is, well, that makes it really hard for the Black person. But then you realize this is really bad for the white person as well, because they don't learn how to overcome obstacles. They don't learn how difficult things could be. And then you start thinking about the patriarchy and how bad the patriarchy is for men and boys, for individual men and boys who struggle to, express emotion, because the patriarchy says, no, you've got to be strong. Women are soft and squishy and emotional and over-emotional. But men and boys aren't allowed to express emotion at all. And heaven forbid that they ever touch another human being except for sex. So you can see when you start examining the systems of power, rather than the people who have been affected by them, that's when it gets so much easier to have compassion. So when somebody comes up with some horrible racist comment in the context of this discussion around the change to our constitution, I can get to a point of compassion for them, even at the same time as saying I will protect other people from hearing that nonsense, because no First Nations people need to hear that because it's really harmful for them. But I can also feel compassion for that person, that individual, because I know that their psyche has been so damaged by the racist systems that gave them those feelings of fear and othering and that distrust, that deep level of distrust. So I think it's thinking about these systems and the societal influences can also be really helpful when it comes to compassion for other people. And yes, we're all going to slip into judgment because we have this knee-jerk reaction. Of course we do. It's what we do after that counts. Do I then come back to a position of compassion, or do I just stay being angry? Well, I know which one I'd rather do because it feels better to me aside from anything else.
Right.
But also it can open the door to conversation.
Well, and it reminds me of the conversation, and I know I've heard it from several different sources, so I don't know which one to quote. But when they say, you asked God for patience. So he needs to give you something that teaches you that patience. And that when you're talking about that race and the non-obstacle and the one with obstacles, and it's, if I came here to become the best jumper in the world, I need things to jump over to push myself for. Mm-hmm. And we don't know what we chose. Well, some people don't, to learn here. Mm-hmm. And so if we signed up to learn to be strong, there's going to be shit that's going to happen to us, because that's the only way you can learn strength. You came here to learn how to forgive. Something's going to have to happen for you to forgive. You don't learn forgiveness by not having a reason to forgive. And so it's like, okay, if you can understand that person or you, doesn't matter, is going through the things they want or they're learning, you wish that away, you're taking away the strength or the result from it. Oh, that poor person, they're getting so many things. They're never, they really gotta, their patience is never going to come around. Well, no, they are learning to be patient. That's what's going to teach them. I am learning to forgive all this trauma and stuff in my life. or whoever's life. I don't think I've had a super traumatic life, so I'm not as strong as those people. But we have our role.
Yeah.
And I cannot judge somebody else's process they're going through. I cannot where they're at today. There are no expectations of who you are. Someone had a Facebook post and says, "Who are the people that you love?"
Mm-hmm.
I put how many people you love. I put however many people there are on earth, past, current, and future.
I love it.
Because, if you can hate somebody and not know anything about them, I sure as hell can love them and not know anything about them. And
I love that. Yes.
Allowing them to do and be them. And the second we have the power to allow others, we also have to allow ourselves and quit trying to stand up to that expectation that we think somebody else has. We were raised from kids. Get good grades, then you'll be liked. Do this, do smile, be nice, do all these rules to be accepted. And that is, we don't want to get kicked out of the pack. You can't survive on your own. So you learn to fit in, but we can belong.
Yes.
And the message of life is let's belong together.
Yes. And I think it's also worth clarifying, or not clarifying, that's the wrong word, but teasing out a little detail that I really love here, which is I don't have to belong with everybody. There are people on the planet who really, really dislike me. And you know what? That's totally okay with me. That's totally their choice. I don't need them to love me. I don't need them. I'm only interested in this is this weird thing of I'm very interested in the societal thing and the systems and the influences they have. But I'm also very, very interested in how each of us gets to shape our own lives. And one of the ways that I do that is by training myself, working with my own psyche so that I care more about belonging with the people for whom I am their choice and less about fitting in with the people for whom I am not their choice anyway. Like they wouldn't like the real me. So, and that's okay. They're allowed to not like me. And that's actually quite a revolutionary thing, I think, especially for a lot of women who, of a certain generation, certainly my generation, where being liked was such an important thing. I mean, I don't know anybody who didn't go through high school with some level of wanting to be liked, wanting to be popular, insecurity. I mean, the list goes on.
So, Janet, what is your favorite flavor of ice cream?
Oh, my favorite flavor of ice cream. I always go for a double. So that's the first thing is I don't like having to choose one. It will be pistachio plus probably Old English toffee. Okay,
so if everybody in the world like that, that's the only options there ever was forevermore, would that be a boring society?
It'd be so boring. It'd be so boring.
Yeah, it's like it's okay not to have. I like vanilla. I'm boring, but I like it, and I don't like all the other stuff. And so if we all were exactly the same, it would be so boring.
Oh my gosh.
Can you imagine? There's no other color in the world but green. We'll even give you the variety of green so we can at least see some texture. But how are you going to find your car? How are you going to find your house? How are you going to find your mate? Everything is the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's okay to not like things, but it's not okay to put somebody else down for liking it.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think there's a really interesting concept that is so useful to remember, and that is you came to planet Earth as a completely and utterly unique human being. Nobody has existed before that was completely like you, and nobody will exist in the future that is like you. And you arrive with this complete package of potential of you-ness. And then, of course, we all go through this process of being programmed by social pressures, trauma, all of the things that happen to us. So Jung said that the work of life is the journey of life is the journey back towards the self. And as we mature and we free ourselves from those old limitations and we return to ourselves, we return to this unique expression of self, you fill a hole in the universe that wouldn't be filled if you didn't do that work. So this is, when you talk about ideas, concepts like self-improvement and being better, for me, the thing that really lights me up is it's less about better because of that thing of, the social expectations of what better actually means. It's almost more like personal best. The concept for athletes, I'm not a runner, by the way, so I'm completely making this up. But for athletes, there is that thing where sometimes it's not about winning the race, it's about getting your personal best that day. And I love that concept because that's the question that I ask myself. Have I been living my personal best today? Have I been expressing more of Janet in the world than anybody else can? Because nobody can express Janetness in the world. Nobody can express Lara Jane-ness in the world. That just doesn't exist unless you do it. Nobody else can do it for you.
But I also want to say that being at my personal best is not this constant increasing line uphill.
No, absolutely.
I have dips, I have valleys, but you know what? I need those dips to get stronger again. Yeah. I need that fluctuation, that change. So don't, if you're thinking, oh, well, I ran this in 1 minute yesterday, I got to run it in 1 minute and 1 millionth of a second today and 2 millionths of a second tomorrow. That's, you're going to have a cold or you're going to have a physical down day. Your best may be a half a minute, but you gave it your all. And so it's not measured in the same kind of thing, but it's measured in the heart and the soul that you put behind it.
That's such a good point. And you're completely right. So it was a terrible metaphor and I apologize.
No, it was good. I'm just saying it does.
It was incomplete, but it was incomplete. So I want to add a layer of what personal best could look like. So for me on a particular day, personal best might look like me looking at my list of things to do for the week, tuning into my body, realizing that what my body actually needs right now, or even what my soul actually needs right now, is not to be productive. It might look like me feeling what I need right now and realizing what I really need is half an hour of building Lego or half an hour of reading a novel or a 2-hour nap. And if that's the case, if listening to my authentic needs and fulfilling them in that moment, that's my personal best for that day, then I have expressed Janetness in the world on that day. And so that does count as my personal best.
Yes.
Even though to the outside world, it might look like I just skived off for the whole day and didn't do any work. That's completely
And we don't care
different.
What the world thinks, right?
Exactly.
We have to be true to ourselves. But,
yes.
You bring up this point, and I'm sure you've read the book. So I know I've said it before, but the Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he has the one thing about sharpening your saw. And
Absolutely.
The one guy is sawing this tree and just doesn't give up. And then there's other, he looks over and the guy keeps sitting down and he cuts the tree down faster because he took the time to take care of the tool. And
yes.
You are the tool that you are operating in this world. And you have got to take the time to fuel it. You've got to take the time to sharpen it. You've got to take the time to rest it. And you've got to take the time to use it. And so each and every one of those processes that we do for our tool are essential
yes.
to our growth. And we cannot measure it by a society's expectation of productivity.
Absolutely. And in fact, I often teach my clients that I give them a tool whereby they are required to count playtime and rest time as hours worked. So I get them to imagine that they are tracking. It doesn't matter whether they're doing paid work or unpaid work, but I get them to track what they're doing as though it were billable hours, as though, you know how they have that thing in law firms and so on, where you note down absolutely everything because you need to know who's going to get billed. I spend 10 minutes working on this thing, that bill goes to such and such a client. So I get them to record it as though it's billable hours, and I make sure that they, in addition to counting folding laundry and writing emails and doing client work and whatever else, that playtime and rest time equally get counted as billable hours in air quotes. So that productivity is definitely a societal thing that says you're only useful for the product of your labor, which I think that gets me down a whole other rabbit hole about how we are human beings, not human doings. But counting those that sharpening of the tool, we are so not taught how to do that. It's such a foreign concept, and it's such a useful one to remind ourselves this is all part of me being more me in the world, expressing myself more in the world, because without it, the world misses out on Lara Jane-ness. It misses out on Janet-ness. It misses out on the you-ness of you. And that would be a shame.
I think I could talk to you forever. Do you have another hour? This has been so much fun.
I'd love to come back.
Yes, this is like, I'm just like, you energize me because you have such wisdom that you have to share with the world. And I so appreciate the time that you have spent with me, but we are at the end of time. You have so much to share that I want to give you another opportunity for those last minute of wisdom that you want to share. So make sure we get the listener the absolutely most value for their time.
I think if I were to sum up everything that I feel so passionately about what it means to be human, is to recognize that blaming and shaming ourselves for not being perfect it's so unhelpful and it's so unkind. It's inhumane. We need to embrace and love on our own humanity, our own imperfections and flaws and things that aren't even flaws, the stuff that we inherited and was installed in us that is not a character flaw, that is not a you problem, except that now your work is to unprogram that, to deprogram that, and taking that pressure off and recognizing that we are all doing the best we can, and it is a journey, and it is not a once and done thing. This is a journey, and it all comes back to radical kindness turned inwards. Patience with your own self. Yeah, it's good, isn't it?
Yes, I love that. I've been working on this new thing called self-care from the inside out. Because we have got to change our thoughts. It doesn't matter how long your eyelashes are, or how pretty your nails are. If you don't love yourself, if your thoughts are not supporting you and who you are, it's just paint on old piece of furniture. Yeah. So I know that the listener's going to want to look in those show notes and find how to get a hold of you, because you are amazing. Thank you so much. Listener, Janet and I are not medical professionals. We are here for entertainment. And obviously, this has been so much fun. So this is like, how can you have so much fun? This is what we do for a living now. We have fun.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just want to say, I'm going to interrupt you, Lara Jane, and I know that's not what we're supposed to do. But I just want to say thank you so, so much for letting me talk about this with your listener, because I talk about the idea that I want to wreak more joy in the world. And if I have to do it one human at a time, that's totally okay with me. And very occasionally I get the opportunity to maybe talk to, through channels like yours, which are doing such great work in the world, that I get to talk to multiple humans, one human at a time. And yes. I love that.
Yes, it's a beautiful process. And I am so thankful that the universe guided me here. In fact, he didn't just guide me here, threw me into it. And I am very thankful for it.
Thank you for letting me come and play. It's been absolutely delightful.
Anytime. You definitely are welcome back anytime, even if it's just a sidebar all by ourselves. And I think, listeners, stay tuned for the next episode. Talk to you soon.
Are you tired of waking up exhausted? You are not alone. If you're looking to take your life back, let's start with the simple step of adjusting your self-talk. Stay tuned for the next episode with your host, Lara Jane. Remember to follow the show so you don't miss a next simple step that you can use to feel more confident. And please leave an honest review.